Hey everyone, Lucas Larson here, the maker of The People Who Suspend. And I just wanted to give you guys a little bit more than what has already been released in the film. Obviously, I couldn't include the long form interviews for everyone who I sat down with, but a lot of people had some really amazing stuff to share, and I just wanted to give you a little bit more of that. And I figured I'd start with Fakir Musafar. He was my mentor. The film is dedicated to him, and actually he was the first person I interviewed for the film. And he was largely the inspiration for the direction that the film went. And so anyway, this interview is very important to me, and I haven't actually seen any other interviews that are this recent. Fakir passed away in 2018, so we don't have the luxury of speaking to him anymore and hearing any more of his words. So I hope you guys enjoy these. I'm going to be interjecting here and there just to give a little bit of context and explain a few things that he might be saying that might be going over some people's heads. So hope that is not ruining the interview, but I think some of this stuff is actually important. So let's just move on with the interview. So this happened in Mexico. This was in 2014, actually. Yeah, so this is actually before anything. Very first interview. It's very rough. Something to keep in mind. I had just purchased this camera, and I didn't even own a camera before making this film. Not like a professional camera. So I didn't really know what I was doing. I had an external mic attached, but it did not have a battery in it. It's really embarrassing, but I thought it was powered by the camera. I had just bought the microphone also. So anyway, all this audio was actually recorded on the camera, which was pretty much a garbage mic. It's there, but you're not intended to use it really for anything. You're supposed to hook on an external mic. Anyway, I did turn over the audio to an audio engineer and had him restore a lot of it. So what you're hearing, believe it or not, is incredible that even exists considering the original audio. Anyway, I'll stop rambling and let's just watch the video.
All right, I'm known as Fakir Musafar, but I wasn't always Fakir. I got that name in 1977 at the first International Tattoo Convention in Reno, Nevada. It was given to me by the man who kind of brought all of the people together who had done body piercing, who had a body piercing, because there was no organization. There was no world of body piercing in those days. I met Doug Malloy in 1972 at a kinky party, and he saw some of the pictures I had taken of myself with my little experiments starting way back in the 1940s and 50s. And he said, "Do you have more of these photographs?" And I said, "Sure I do, but you'll have to come to San Francisco to visit me to see them because they're there." So I went to the airport in my little gray Volkswagen Bug and picked up Doug Malloy. Didn't know who he was, just a guy. And we got very connected with each other over just a night. We sat and drank coffee until dawn, and we became spiritual friends, not friends in any other sense. We understood that we found out both of us had realized that from ancient times on, people had discovered ways to connect their spirit through a physical exercise, through a physical means. And one of these was very ritualistically done in all kinds of cultures, and it involved piercing the body. Piercing the body, and in some cases pulling on the piercings, in other cases suspending the body from these piercings.
How old are you, and when did you first suspend?
I am 84 years old as of today.
Oh, happy birthday.
No, my birthday was in August. I was born in 1930 in Aberdeen, South Dakota, which at that time was a small town on an Indian reservation, the Sisseton Sioux Reservation in the northeast corner of the state of South Dakota. I was born with non-Indian parents, but when I grew up, the Bureau of Indian Affairs had tried to make good Americans out of all the natives in the area, and they dumped all kinds of Native Americans in South Dakota because there was a lot of worthless land. So in our particular town, they were allowed, if they were on reservation people, kids, to go to our public schools. So I went to public schools with Native American people, primarily Lakota, some Sioux, some Yanktonai people. And I found out that I fit better into their culture than I did in the culture of the white people that I grew up with. And by the age of 12, I had experienced their powwows and had heard their elders speak about their ancient traditions and culture, their rites of passage, and their one famous ritual called the sun dance, which the Lakota people are well known for. So at an early age, or because I knew it from firsthand from Lakota people, I went out into the country and did my first mini sun dance, piercing myself, tethering myself to a tree, praying to the gods, praying to Wankantanka, the great white spirit, to lift me up. And I pulled against my piercing. And the object of these people in doing this was different than some of the people now that are pulling on hooks. The object of the piercing in Lakota and the piercing in the Sundance ritual is to see how long you can dance, not how hard you can pull. It was not a show, it was an initiation. And all the young men had to do the Sundance.
Right. So what ways has suspension benefited you in your life?
Well, that's a loaded question. Until you have these transformative experiences, it doesn't do much for you. I mean, you know, today there are a lot of kids that are out here doing pulls or doing suspensions, and it's like level 1. But man, there are 100 levels, and very few of them get beyond level 1. At level 1 and 2, when you do these kinds of things, it's sort of like an extreme sport. I call it sport suspensions or sport pulls. And it's how can you pull a truck? How hard can you pull? Can you pull somebody over? Can you, some cases where we use smaller piercings, can you rip your flesh free? That's not the point. The point is to dance like this, to dance yourself into a trance state. Now I found out in later years, they've done this in 3 cultures. They're all pretty much the same, doing it for the same reasons. This was done for hundreds of years. We don't have much written language in the American culture, American Indian culture. It was not done by the Southwest Indians or the Northwest Indians, but only by the Plains Indians in the plain states of this country. And now, for some reason, the Indians have gotten together with each other. You have the American Indian movement. And so we have Indians down in pueblos in New Mexico doing sun dances, which were unheard of 100 years ago. When I grew up in the 1930s, the sun dance was illegal. The Bureau of Indian Affairs ruled all the government and all the Indians in our country. And they were virtual slaves, really, to our federal government. And the goal of the government was to make good white people out of them. That's why they put them to school with us, or they sent them to what was like a reformatory, where they cut their hair, they couldn't speak the language and things like that, or sing their songs, try to make good white people out of them. But when I was a boy, still in the 30s, they would do this secretly. And if the Indians were caught doing a sun dance, it meant 20 years in jail for practicing your religion. That was how bad it was. So, where do we go from here?
So I did choose to eliminate the point where Fakir was saying that a lot of people suspending today are like level 1. That it's like training wheels, or I think he said at this point. And I left that out just because I think a lot of people would probably take that wrong and possibly be offended by that statement. But I think what he possibly failed to properly make clear is he's referring to his experience of suspension, which is a completely spiritual experience. And that doesn't mean, I don't think he's trying to criticize the way people are practicing suspension. He's just, in terms of like how they were achieving it with these long ceremonies and stuff. It's just a totally different experience. And so to compare the two, I agree, is difficult to do, because aside from having hooks in your body and leaving the ground from those piercings, there's very little similarity between a lot of suspensions. Like, if I hope all of you have seen the film already. If you haven't, definitely check it out. But if you see like the free fall suspension and then compare it with the traditional Sundance ceremony, they're radically different. I mean, there's essentially no similarities aside from body piercing. But yeah, you heard in that audio there, it was just incredibly rough. I was very, very sad that so much of that was damaged right there, because whenever he says the Native Americans were, to practice the Sundance meant 20 years in jail for practicing your religion. And I feel like that was a really important line, and that is totally factual. You can look it up. That was in the law. So, yeah, that's not an exaggeration. And so, you know, I thought that was really important to show where we have come, and just try to get across to a lot of the people practicing suspension today who obviously have no exposure. I mean, most of the people practicing suspension today are not, aren't old enough to have experienced any of these things that Fakir did. So it's a little bit hard to understand the sacrifice and fear that went into doing this, because, you could get into a lot of trouble. I mean, if people found out you were doing this, whether it's illegal or not, the impact on you and your life would be drastic. So there's definitely I have a great amount of admiration for what Fakir did. He did it at a time when it was dangerous to do it. Anyway, I'm done interrupting.
I mean, if you could like slightly more succinctly express like maybe just a couple things of how you really feel like you've been benefited as a person in your life.
Oh, well, this has been a marvelous transformation for me. It gave me my power. There were two things that were necessary. Number one, you have to have the magic mark. The magic mark is a tattoo that is done magically and shamanically by someone who knows what they're doing, and it puts you or gives you the power that you should have, that you don't have until your body is marked. In my case, I had a vision, like they have vision quests for the young Indian boys. Somebody says, what kind of a tattoo should you get? I say, I can't tell you this. Go out and dig a hole 3 feet deep, put a blanket in there, a jug of water, and sit in there for 2 days. If you have a vision, a picture of yourself, a vision of yourself with a mark, that's your magic mark. That's what I got. So I had my vision many, many times. Finally, I made a photograph of my back, primarily back and lower part of my body, and I drew it up in great detail, and it kept coming clearer and clearer as I kept drawing it and seeing it in my visions. And it turns out that it's like flame coming up out of the earth is what it represents. And when you have that, you're able to do a certain kind of shamanic magic. So I carried that vision for years and went around to tattoo artists all over the Midwest, Chicago, Minneapolis. I would go and say, you tattoo? I say, yeah, Sonny, I tattoo. I says, well, I'd like you to tattoo this on my back. And I'd show them my design. Well, it was nothing but anchors and clankers and Betty Boop and stuff. It was just flash off the wall. They had never seen anything like this before. And I said, well, that's great, Sonny, but how about a dragon on your shoulder? And I say, no, thank you. I want this on my back. It took years before I found somebody that understood what I was getting was a magic mark. And that happened to be a guy named Davy Jones, who was tattooing in Oakland. At that time, he had worked in Lyle Tuttle's studio in San Francisco. And I had made an appointment to see Davy one Sunday afternoon. I went over and I showed him my drawing. He said, instead of saying, hi, Sonny, how about a anchor on your arm or something like that? He said, I'd be honored to do that. I said, when can we start? And he says, how about right now? So that was how I got my magic mark. That was in 1963.
Right.
So right here he's talking about the magic mark, and I actually bring that up at a point whenever I was getting my legs tattooed in the film, of how you know, in a lot of ways tattoos are a rite of passage for people, even you know, the uninitiated, in terms of like heavy body modification. Just getting a simple butterfly tattoo might be like a really profound experience for some people. But what he said made a lot of sense to me, because the tattoo he's referring to is just like a black pattern. You can look it up. It's easy to find online if you search his name. But he comments on my tattoos, my upper body. It's just this black design. And a lot of people ask what it means, and the simple answer is it's like a Rorschach. I mean, it was a Rorschach for me, because I just looked in the mirror one day and I took a marker and started drawing on me, and I didn't really know where the design came from. It called to me, and once I had it on my body, I knew that was the one. So I understand what he's saying right here, that it gives you the power, because, you know, body art is a very empowering thing. I mean, you're truly making your body your own. We don't get to decide how our body is given to us. We're just born that way. It's just a combination of genetics and, you know, life events that affect you know, what our body looks like and what it can do. And anyway, that's it.
How has the treatment from friends, family, and society changed towards you since practicing suspension? Actually, just one second. Let me check the audio and make sure we're still good.
Are we recording?
We are good.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, when I grew up, I started doing my little experiments like mini pulls and piercings and so on, but I did it all secretly and privately, because I knew if anybody had found out, saw my pictures, or knew what I was doing, at that point, 1930s, when I grew up as a boy, and 1940s, they would have committed me to an institution and probably thrown the key away. It was absolutely dangerous to let anybody know that you did anything like this. Even getting your ears pierced or having even the smallest tattoo was considered aberrant. There was something wrong with you, and that's of course not true today, especially looking at you. Big black work all over, you know, totally black. So my experiments went from one phase to another. I'm going to give a talk on that this evening, and tomorrow I'll be giving a big talk on it. But I started, my first transformative experience was by myself when I moved to California after I'd left home. I tried to do a suspension from my chest, because I had gotten a copy of Catlin's book printed in 1869 of drawings he had made in 1862 of the Mandan Indians. Now, in their culture, all young men and all older men who were medicine men had to do this each year. And this was a rite of passage. It was called, the whole week-long ceremony was called Okipa, the Okipa. And it was very serious and very heavy. You had to fast, you had to abstain from any sexual activity, you had to tie your penis in a knot so to tie it down and all this stuff. But at the end of this, the young men were taken into a lodge and were pierced in their chest or in their back opposite the heart chakra, and were lifted up. Now, an older man was in charge of every younger man. He was called a cacique. A cacique is a guide. It has to be somebody who has been hung by this suspension and had a vision. And his job was to take care of you physically, because if you hung, especially from the chest, for more than 20 minutes, your lungs fill with fluid and you die. So you have to be careful that you don't die doing this ritual. Also, the cacique has to have inner vision and be able to see what you're seeing as you get out of your body. Because the purpose of this ceremony of the suspension was to be so painful and so intense that you couldn't stay in your body, that you, the part of you that thinks, feels, answers to a name, and has memories, and sees and records everything, that part of you lifts out of your physical body. That was the purpose of the suspension, not to thrill and entertain people. So on that journey, I tried it several times myself, but without help. I had no casika. And I came very close to going out of my body, and I knew if I did that, and being alone and having no help and no guards or protection, they'd find dead meat hanging there a few days later. Finally, I asked Davy Jones, who did my magic mark. Now, he had lived in the Pacific. He was a merchant seaman and had lived amongst people in the Pacific. He had gone to Samoa, Western Samoa, and had gotten the flying fox tattoo. Magic mark, again. And each one is different. Nobody has the same marks. It is not off the wall. So he understood what I was doing, and he understood well enough that I needed to do this suspension in order to have that experience that I needed or craved so badly. So he came, and on my first transformative experience, I drifted out of my body, boom, 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 and I was looking down on it, hanging on the hooks. And I met a white light, and it talked to me. This was Wankantanka, the great white spirit of the Lakotas that you see when you do a Sundance. And the light said to me, I'm God. And let's see, what did he say now? I can almost remember the word. It was almost like words, but it wasn't words. It was just in my consciousness. That's all there was there, just consciousness. It was, hello, I'm you and you're me, and I'm as close to God as you're ever going to be. I think that's about what it said. And we had a long telepathic conversation, and there's no time when you're like not in your body. There's no time. A second could be 1,000 years, 1,000 years could be a second. There's no time. So I learned a lot, and from that I've carried on and done this ritual again, and I've helped other people do this ritual privately, or usually outdoors in the trees. Always try to find a place where Native Americans have done it, because usually the space there is special. It has special radiation. It has the vibe of this ritual. I did it many times. One time, there were some people that found out about this were filmmakers. And I said, well, I want to do this in a very Indian place in Wyoming, Sundance, Wyoming, where they actually did this. I want to do a Sundance. And I have no Native Americans to help us, so we'll do it as Native American as we possibly can. I knew from my friends how to do this. I had been instructed. I said, I need some help. At that point in time, I had connected with Jim Ward, and he had started the Gauntlet in LA, the first body piercing shop anywhere. And I asked Jim Ward, who understood what I was doing, and he says, well, I would like to do the Sundance. Could I do the Sundance with you? I says, yes. And when we're through with the Sundance, I would like to be suspended like the Ogallala do outdoors. The Mandan did it indoors, the Ogallala people did it outdoors. And they did it pretty hardly sometimes. They would pierce them, put them on a pony, slap the pony's butt, you were hung. Or the other way was slow, because it was considered more holy to do it slow, which was to slowly twist yourself up so that you got higher and higher off the ground until you were suspended. And then somebody continued and suspended, pulled you up into a cottonwood tree. So as filmmakers heard about this and said, can we film it? I says, only if we don't see you. You have to be invisible. We're doing a magic ritual here, and you will interfere with us. This isn't take one, scene two. This, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. So these were very, very good filmmakers, and they filmed that. And it's in this movie we made called Dances Sacred and Profane. And you can pretty well get the feeling and the spirit and the essence of it all come through very well in that film.
So yeah, here, this is the part that I try to explain to people. A lot of people in the suspension community, especially the ones from outside the United States where the Sundance was never actually practiced natively, like there were no ancient cultures practicing the Sundance. Possibly something similar, but I'm not aware of that. Anyway, and a lot of people in the United States actually refer to this as the Okipa, which, as you can hear in this interview, the Okipa is a week-long ceremony that includes the sun dance, which is a suspension. You'll hear people refer to chest suspensions all the time as an oki paw. And definitely, I think that's pretty clear cultural appropriation. It's one thing to explore a culture's practice. It's another thing to name your knockoff ritual the same as theirs. It's definitely... I see it as kind of a slap in the face. It's like just because I take baths regularly, but I don't consider any of them baptisms. But I'm still laying in water, so it's kind of the same thing. Just doesn't have any of the meaning. That's how I look at this, and that's how I think. I think that's why there's a lot of disconnect with Fakir and his practices and the way people are practicing them today. Today there's virtually no spiritualism like related to suspension. I think a lot of people play up the spirituality, but I think it's sort of like pseudo wokeism, unfortunately. But there are some people who are definitively trying to recreate these rituals as authentically as possible and trying to understand them. And I think that's what Fakir did. Also, Fakir was invited by Native Americans. It wasn't like he was just looking and creating his knockoff ritual. So he has definitely had a perspective that I do not consider what he did cultural appropriation, although a lot of what's happening today I do consider cultural appropriation. But at the same time, it's your own body. I'm not trying to dictate what people do with it. I just think we should show a little bit of respect for the people who proved things before we came along, because ultimately no one believed suspension was real until we saw it. I mean, no one could fathom that the skin was that powerful. Anyway, it's, yeah. And whenever you hear that, whenever you hear about this extreme out-of-body experience, I've had that, but it is not with every suspension. So clearly what is happening here is separate from my typical suspensions. So anyway, I was really grateful I was able to cover this, simply because his perspective is so radically different than almost anyone in suspension. So anyway, let's move.
So specifically, did you feel any backlash from like your family and friends? Like,
My family and friends never knew about this. The only people that knew about this were the community that I moved in. And only those guarded few that I let know I was doing it. Was very unpublic. Whereas now today we have a lot of people that try to make this as public as they can. I know the goodies that you get out of it as an individual are probably not going to happen in public. But I have been to some suscons and things, and I found a few people in the group that do this who are getting that experience. If they carry it far enough and they do it with good enough intent, they will end up usually reaching a wall, a barrier, and if they can jump over that wall, they will be in the same magic space as the Lakota Oglala Indians and the people in India, where they also do this. They've been doing this in India on the left-hand path of India. There are different ways you can go in India in their experiments, in their religious practice. I follow the left-hand path. This is Lord Shiva, Lord Murugan, Lord Ganesha, and all of those people. And their way is to use the body to get back into spirit and out of spirit. Then there are the ones who do it through righteous devotion. They were like, it's called Bhakti Yoga, and that would be the Hare Krishna people. It's Hare Krishna. You say that and put all your attention on something that's above you and human beings, and you will also go out into those other spaces, and your consciousness will be lifted. You'll be improved.
So what is your opinion on society's current perception of the practice of suspension?
They're in baby steps. They're learning how to do things, and we being a mechanical scientific culture, there's a lot of emphasis on how strong the ropes are and how high you go or how far it is beneath your feet. When you're 2 inches off the ground, it's no different than being 200 feet or 2,000 feet. It's the same experience. It's emotionally different, yeah, if you're hanging off a cliff than if you're hanging 2 inches off the floor. But where it puts your consciousness is the same if you go there. So I think that like a lot of people are learning that what they're doing, it's great. You learn a lot about yourself just being pierced and hung up by piercings. You say, this is something I didn't think was possible. And with me, it's scary as hell. You faced scary shit and you've overcome it. That's learning a lot. But I tell you, it's still training wheels. It's still training wheels. Eventually, if you do this enough, if you have any heart, you'll eventually want to do more than that. You'll want to go beyond that.
So, let me rephrase that. Like, how do you think the outsiders are looking at the people who practice suspension?
As freaks. Frankly, as freaks. As show business freaks. Even if you're just doing it like bungee jumping or something as a sport, it's still pretty unacceptable in the mainstream world. Now, we've been able to get into media and we've been getting it out, and that has not been good, by and large, to make this happen in a more positive way. Like Facebook and so on, all these things, and the pictures of bad body piercing does not exactly help our cause. People out there in the world think, oh, this is it. We see a bloody bad piercing and people think, oh man, this has got to be incredibly painful and, you know, bloody, when in essence it is not. The same thing holds true for the pulls and suspensions world. I see some pretty bloody things. I mean, you know, way beyond reason. Monstrous hooks put at the wrong angle through the grain of the skin, which means that it's going to tear and bleed, and then they run around and tuck gauze in there. I never do that. I have no bleeding. I almost never have bleeding when I do suspensions from anybody. I use very small hooks, even on very large people. I don't have to have monsters on there. If you put them in the right place, you'll hang on them. My very first suspensions I didn't have hooks because we had to go to India. I kind of brought hooks back from India. Nobody here was using hooks for this stuff. They were all using something else. Plugs and pegs and whatever, you know, skewers. So when we came back from visiting Malaysia and India, they were using hooks and doing all these rituals that I admired and imitated and copied. We brought back the idea and finally found some mustad fishing hooks and bound the barbs off. And that's kind of where hooks got started, way back in about 1985. Stellark was the only other one that found out you could use hooks to do this. It was unknown before then. My first suspensions in the 1960s were done with wire loops. I used piano wire, essentially, very thin wire, 14 or 12 gauge, and I bent them in loops and pierced them. You'll see on my video. We show this tonight. And I suspended many times from those 14 gauge wires. Nothing ripped, nothing bled, nothing tore. Believe me, you don't need monster hooks.
I guess kind of my final question to you is you've been around for so long. Obviously, you're really the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today if I look back at the root cause. With how things have progressed, how do you see your legacy going on? Like after you're no longer on this earth, like where do you see things going?
Well, I'm very optimistic. You know, you start something and it gets vibrational in the culture, and it just carries on. Now, because we have communication, it's easier to make this happen really fast. You know.
I'm sorry. The microphone's slipping down. Let's just
start over.
Yeah, let's start over with that question.
Where do I see this going?
Okay. Now, like where do you see specifically your legacy as far as like where you came from and where you have taken this?
Well, I'm just a part of a whole. Let's put it this way. And I just happened to start out a little earlier than the rest. Like the Dances film was 20 years ahead of its time. If we'd have introduced that film now, you would have seen it in theaters. When we did it, they tried mightily. It was a commercial film, a full-length feature documentary shot professionally, and we couldn't get anybody to run it in the theater. They were scared to run the film. There wasn't time for it. now, it could have been released, and it wouldn't be like with a lot of the fun and games ones that we have, you know. But I'm truly very optimistic, and my role has just been to show the way in everything, including in the Modern Primitives book. All I ever intended to do was be an example to say, hey, look what I did. Screw up your courage, you can do it too. And a lot of people have said, hey, if you can do it, I can do it too. And they tried it, and they've had transformative experiences. That's what it's all about, to find out that this is one path, not the only one, but one path that you can use to discover the true nature of your being. To reach the divine. I think I reached the divine. When I saw the white light and it talked to me, that was it.
Thank you so much for doing this. Is there anything else like that you just want to say or add in that maybe I haven't
No, I
asked?
think you pull little bits of this out, you got the essence of what Fakir's all about.
Can I give you a hug?
You sure can. Mike and disconnect the iPod over here. This an iPod Touch?
It's actually my iPhone.
iPhone. I like the iPod Touch. I really had fun with that one.
Yeah.
I do West African drumming because they're also into trancing by physical means and by. So I sit there with my djembe or boom, booka, boom, pan, the dunumba, the kankani, and got the boom, bigita, and we get ourselves into a trance state every Saturday.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything you've done.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I really, every time your name comes up, I tell people just how much you mean to me, and how much this has been.
Well, spread it around.
Great, I will, and I promise you, everything with this is being done to change people's perception on this.
I mean,
so
we gotta
people
get them rid of the training wheels. We gotta get them up so they can really ride this bicycle.
We need to. I mean, like, I don't want to leave those people out. I'm absolutely going to be interviewing the people who you're talking about who have training wheels. Because I don't want to.
They would be offended if I told them I thought that they were doing their training. It's
course.
fine. You got to start somewhere.
Of course.
For Christ's sake.
But ultimately, some of these people, you know, are doing it for completely different reasons. But I want the world to see that there are people who are doing these for very deep and significant reasons, and not just trying to make money being on stage.
Right.
Because
well, I've been on stage too.
Of course, but
that gave me a chance to talk to people.
But you're not trying.
A soapbox to stand on and tell them what the real deal is.
But you're not trying to be shocking, and a lot of them are trying to shock. You know, they're deliberately ripping their hooks out. They're making the blood as accentuated as possible.
Ellen Faulkner and I have had a running battle for 20 years, and he's now kind of coming around to my thing. We did a joint show in San Francisco. I pulled a woman up with my chest piercings up, like I do that quite often. And he did one where he was suspended multiply, and then he went and reached up with a knife and he cut things so he'd be hanging by a few. He cut his head open.
I saw that.
You were there?
No, I wasn't there, but I've seen the video. And
I shot stills on that.
Yeah.
Everybody thought that was part of the act, and they wanted more blood. And here he was. We're calling the fucking ambulance.
Yeah, I think I've probably seen the specific stills.
Well, you know, it's like ancient Rome when they threw them out there and they had the lions rip them apart. You know, that's entertainment. When it gets to that point, the society has degraded itself, sort of, you see. That's a real honest opinion here from Fakir.
All right, so that's Fakir Musafar. There at the end, we were kind of just, talking a little bit about the purpose of the film. I didn't really know what I was doing at that point, but what I was saying, just to be clear, it may sound like we were being critical of the performers. We're really not. I mean, Fakir said he's performed. I've performed myself. The thing is, the experience you provide whenever you're performing is typically just radically different from like a personal suspension or a small group with people. The way I look at it is, after people see your suspension performance, do you think they are more likely to continue exploring suspension, or do you think they just got a cheap thrill and then they're going to move on? Or at worst, do you think they are scared of suspension now? Because certainly when you see hacks who have no idea what they're doing, dropping people and getting their videos on Tosh.0 and stuff, that those people are cancerous to suspension. They're the ones who are truly destroying the public perception of suspension and making it look like a joke. And Fakir was worried about it. I was very worried about it. That's why I made the film. Whenever I tell people, I practice suspension, the last thing I want is to be associated with these garbage videos, which, you know, it seems like the least experienced people who are doing things in the worst possible ways, they always track down a film crew to point a camera at them while they're doing it. And then who knows where that video is going to end up. So this film was designed to change people's minds on this. Or if they've never had any exposure to them, give them a positive exposure. Start them off on the right foot. Hopefully after seeing this film, people look at it and they're like, I find this admirable. These people can do something that's superhuman. And one last thing I wanted to clarify, Fakir spoke about if you hang for over 20 minutes, your lungs fill with fluid and you'll die. That is completely false. I've suspended someone for a full 24 hours. I've suspended for longer than 20 minutes. Lots of people have. All right, so that is not accurate information, but there was no reason to correct him. This is his practice of suspension, and his methods haven't really changed because they're traditional for him. So anyway, I dearly miss Fakir. I will miss our conversations, and but I hope this film helps his legacy live on. And I hope you all enjoyed it. If you haven't seen it yet, you can go to thepeoplewhosuspend.com. Currently, it's showing at Indie Film Fest, which is unfortunately only online this year due to the pandemic. But I'll leave a link in the description. You can go check it out. Definitely, if you see it, buy it on Indie Fest. And then if you want a DVD, you can go to the website afterward, and I will give everyone who purchased the screening that credit towards the DVD. So I highly recommend getting the DVD, see the whole film. And if you see it on Indie Fest, be sure and vote for this film for the Audience Choice Award. It goes a long way towards validating the importance of the film and get it to a bigger audience. So anyway, thank you all for your time. Definitely be sure to subscribe on YouTube and follow me on Facebook and Instagram and stuff. I'll leave links to everything. But there's a lot more interviews and a ton of content. Unfortunately, there were numerous casualties to the editing room floor. And it would be a shame for that footage to never leave this hard drive because brilliant words were spoken. Unfortunately, too many brilliant words were spoken to fit in the film. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys on the next video.